Syracuse football added to its offensive line today in the transfer portal. But guess what, guys? I don't think they're done adding in the portal at the offensive line spot.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, this is the Ripple Effect podcast, the aftermath, if you will, the full podcast after Naquil Betrand transferred to Syracuse from Alabama earlier this afternoon. Folks, I already did a 10 to 15 minute mini podcast earlier this afternoon on Naquil Betrand, which you can certainly check out when you are done watching or listening to this podcast. But now it's time to talk further about the offensive line. And honestly, it was perfect timing because I was going to talk about the offensive line anyway, and now we have a new addition to it. I do not think that just because they added Naquil Betrand in the portal today, that means that they are done adding an offensive lineman in the portal. I just can't see it. The Orange are still, to my knowledge, publicly linked to two offensive tackles in the portal, Miles McVay and Rahtrel Perry. Okay, so we'll talk about both those guys. And then later on in the podcast, I'm going to give you guys more O-line updates, specifically Brady Norton from Cal Poly, and then a hypothetical offensive line. It's super duper early, but we'll kind of take a look at where the unit is as of this moment. Now, before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Syracuse football, in my opinion, they are not done adding offensive linemen in the portal, and it starts with another Alabama tackle. Miles McVay. 6'6", 330 pounds. Like I said, from Alabama. And I believe he's going to have 3 years of college eligibility remaining. He is a former 4-star recruit, now a 3-star transfer, and he is currently rated as the 16th best tackle in the transfer portal on 24/7 Sports. Like I said at the top of the podcast, the Orange are linked to McVay and later on Rahtrel Perry as well. The link is this: 24/7 Sports reported that McVay is scheduled to visit Syracuse on December 21st. So that is this Saturday. It should also be noted that McVay has a visit to North Carolina on December 19th, 2 days before. So we got a Fran Brown versus Bill Belichick recruiting battle. How about that? Imagine if I told you that a year ago. I wasn't hosting or even producing. I wasn't doing anything with this podcast a year ago, but I would love if I was, and you had told me that this is what would have happened a year later. To put it in basketball terms, honestly, sorry, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here between Fran Brown and Bill Belichick. To put it in basketball terms, that's like if they're not going to do this, but let's say that Syracuse basketball hires a new coach this offseason, and then in his next offseason, he's going into a recruiting battle with Greg Popovich of the San Antonio Spurs. That's kind of how it feels like in football. Fran Brown versus Bill Belichick. It's just so weird, right? But yeah, those guys, they are going after, I think, the same player, Alabama tackle Miles McVay. Here's what you need to know about Miles McVay. He has played sparingly at Bama the last 2 seasons. I believe he redshirted his true freshman year. And then last year, he was a backup tackle. But even as a backup tackle, according to Pro Football Focus, he did play 94 offensive snaps. And he had an overall grade of 45.3. Now, for those that aren't necessarily familiar with Pro Football Focus, PFF for short, it grades players on a scale of 0 to 100. And for offensive linemen, it's the best tool to use because there's really no public stats out there about offensive linemen. So you look at Pro Football Focus for them to kind of give an idea of if they're good or not. So they grade a guy on a scale of 0 to 100. 60 is considered the average. So no, this is not like going to school where 70 is considered passing, 70 is considered average. It's 60 on Pro Football Focus. So, Miles McVay at a 45.3. Obviously, that is not great, okay? It also should be noted that Miles McVay had nearly identical grades in his run blocking and in his pass blocking. Sometimes when you look at any player on the offensive line, any position on the offensive line, they could be drastically better at one aspect. Like someone could be much better at pass blocking than run blocking and vice versa. And that can kind of skew your overall Pro Football Focus grade. A guy could have a 75 in pass block, but a 38 in run block. With a guy like McVay, it's important to note that he had very similar grades in run blocking and pass blocking. Now, the big pro with a guy like Miles McVay is this. Kind of like Betrand, he's coming from the SEC. He's coming from Alabama. And he actually has a little bit more experience than Betrand. He played 94 snaps last year as a backup tackle, and he's got good size. 6'6", 360 pounds. That's a mammoth of a dude right there. That's huge. So he kind of has those physical attributes to be a very effective tackle or potentially an offensive guard. The concern is that even when he played, again, sparingly, but when he played, it wasn't like he was that great. Like I said, 45.3 Pro Football Focus grade. There is no shame in being a highly rated recruit at Alabama and not being able to get on the field. Because when you think of a program like Alabama, every year they are at or near the top in high school recruiting rankings. They get all the best players in high school football. Alabama is one of those programs that if they see a player they want, they're probably going to get him. They're getting all the 5 and 4 stars, which means that they're not all going to play. And oftentimes why a lot of them will transfer out. And like I have told you on the ACC squad, this is what's really creating more of the parity in college football because you can no longer talent hoard with the transfer portal. If a guy's not playing like Miles McVay, he can go take his talents somewhere else, which is exactly what he is doing in the portal right now. I digress on that note that he couldn't necessarily get on the field much for Alabama. It's just that he wasn't necessarily super terrific. It's not an example of a player who was really good in his limited time, but is still going to get limited time. No, he just wasn't that great. 45.3 Pro Football Focus grade. Here's what I would do. When you look at his size, 6'6", 360 pounds. Ideally, he could play tackle, but now that you got Betrand, honestly, I could see them moving McVay maybe to guard. I could see that easily happening. I mean, he's got excellent size to be a tackle or a guard. He really could. He's bigger than Betrand. So that's why I kind of default to McVay. And look, Syracuse could easily use a guard or two in the portal. 4 of their 5 starters from last year are gone. They're out of eligibility, so why not? If Syracuse were to get Miles McVay, it's going to be also similar to Betrand, where if you want to keep him at tackle, you just got to hope that he develops and hope that you can coach him properly. But if not, you can always move him to offensive guard. So Miles McVay is one public target for Syracuse football in the portal. A reminder, he is scheduled to visit Syracuse, according to 24/7 Sports, on December 21st. So that's this Saturday, but he does have an upcoming visit on the 19th with North Carolina. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and we are talking about the offensive line and the fact that the Orange are not done adding in the portal. And coming up, we'll talk about another offensive tackle, Rahtrel Perry. So stick with us on Locked On Syracuse. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Let's talk about another offensive line target here on Locked On Syracuse, because guess what, guys? I do not think the Orange are done adding to their offensive line in the portal just because they got that kid Betrand earlier this afternoon. Let's talk about Rahtrel Perry, okay? 6'5", 305-pound tackle from Central Connecticut. He will have 2 years of college eligibility remaining in 24/7 Sports. Currently has Perry as a top 10 tackle in the portal. Perry has already visited Syracuse. He was in attendance for the Syracuse-Georgetown game. Now, he's coming from the FCS. What does that mean? Obviously, there is a big difference between Power 4, Group of 5, and then the FCS. There's a big difference there. And obviously, that's a little bit of a red flag. But let me address that for you guys regarding Rahtrel Perry, okay? Because I'm going to dispel that narrative for you real quick. Just because they're coming from those lower levels does not mean they're automatically going to be bad. Perry is actually higher rated than the guy we just talked about, Miles McVay, on 24/7 Sports. You can take those rankings for what it's worth, but he's higher rated. He's higher rated than Naquil Betrand, who Syracuse got this afternoon. Those tackles are both coming from Alabama. Meanwhile, a guy like Rahtrel Perry is coming from Central Connecticut. And 24/7 Sports, they actually released an article about Perry, and they mentioned some recent offensive linemen, keyword recent offensive linemen, that have gone from lower level to Power 4 and could be top NFL draft picks. One of those examples was Ohio State tackle Josh Simmons. He went from San Diego State to Ohio State, and he could be one of the top tackles in this year's class. If you're still not convinced about the FCS, here are some other programs that are looking at Rahtrel Perry. You ready? You be the judge of these programs, okay? Ohio State, LSU, Washington, Vanderbilt. If those schools think that Rahtrel Perry could play, I think he can play. What do you think? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Rahtrel Perry is also being looked at by Ohio State, LSU, Washington, and Vanderbilt. Ohio State and LSU are the big ones, really. Those programs think he can play. He can play. That's my opinion. It's not just Syracuse, it's those programs as well. I look at a guy like Perry as having a lot of upside, and he's got more playing experience. Just because it's at a lower level, he's got more playing experience than a guy like McVay or a Naquil Betrand. I think that Perry should be priority one out of all those guys. Now, they already landed one in the boat in Betrand earlier this afternoon, but still. And he's got 2 years of eligibility. So I would love if the Orange can get Rahtrel Perry in the transfer portal. He's 6'5". He's over 300 pounds. He's got multiple years of eligibility. He's got good size, like I said. He's a top 10 tackle in the portal. Other top programs are going after him. So clearly they think that he's pretty good. I like this idea for Syracuse football. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Now, coming up, we'll talk about more offensive line news to catch you up on and a hypothetical offensive line for Syracuse. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Syracuse football, as of right now, they are playing in the Holiday Bowl against Washington State on December 27th, and FanDuel has the Orange as 10.5-point favorites. A big reason why. Kyle McCord for the Orange is going to play. John Mateer, the quarterback for Washington State, he's in the transfer portal, so he's not going to play. And they got a ton of opt-outs. So the Orange are 10.5-point favorites to get their 10th win of the season. What do you think of those odds? Well, you can be the judge for yourself at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch, and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and on today's show, we are talking about the offensive line exclusively. Now, earlier this afternoon, the Orange added to their offensive line in the portal, getting Naquil Betrand from Alabama. It's a solid addition. Potentially could be a starting tackle, maybe a starting guard. Who knows? But what I think, I can't guarantee it, but what I really think is that the Orange are not done adding to their offensive line in the portal. And that's why we talked about Miles McVay and Rahtrel Perry on this show. Okay. So now for some other offensive line updates. And really, there's one massive update for you guys. We talked a lot about Brady Norton. He was on last week's Poll Friday about how, look, Syracuse is going after him. It seems like they have a visit lined up. He could be a great guard for this team, one of the best. He was an FCS All-American. Okay. Again, FCS. But he was an All-American there. He's from Cal Poly. He was supposed to visit the Orange on Wednesday, but he committed to Michigan last night. Norton, he was one of the best guards in the FCS. And again, this commitment in Brady Norton to Michigan just shows you that just because they're coming from the lower level does not mean that they can't play football. If the University of Michigan is saying to Brady Norton that you can play, guess what? He can play. And it also tells you that the Orange had the right idea in going after him. But unfortunately, a big program like Michigan swooped in and got him before he even visited Syracuse on Wednesday. So in my opinion, Norton would have been an awesome guard addition for Syracuse football in the portal. I think he would have easily been able to pencil him in come the opener against Tennessee. But Syracuse football, they got to pivot at the guard spot. And they could pivot, honestly, by moving, let's say they get Miles McVay or Rahtrel Perry, or maybe even both, with Naquil Betrand from earlier this afternoon. They could easily make them a guard. Who knows? Okay. Hypothetical offensive line. This is very, very interesting because the only add so far to the offensive line is Naquil Betrand. It's not a guarantee that he starts. The Orange have two tackles that are coming back for next season and are on the roster as of right now. That's David Wollaba and Demetrius Witherspoon. It's possible that those guys are the starting tackles and then Naquil Betrand is either a backup tackle or they shift him to guard. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they're getting Naquil Betrand from Alabama because they said that he is going to be a starting tackle. Again, I don't know that information, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, he is a starting tackle. That would mean the starting tackles for next year are probably David Wollaba and Naquil Betrand as of right now. I think Witherspoon would be the third tackle because by the end of the season, David Wollaba took his spot. Now, Betrand does have experience playing both sides of the line, at least in high school. So I think Wollaba would be the left tackle. Betrand would be the right tackle, but don't quote me on that. That still leaves both the starting guard spots open and the center position open. Now, it's kind of funny how the two other guys that the Orange are linked to in the portal in the offensive line spot, they're both tackles where they really could use more help at the guard and the center spot right now. Let's just say Syracuse were to land one of Miles McVay or Rahtrel Perry. I think one of them, or maybe Betrand, would be moved to guard. In fact, I would be shocked if none were moved to guard and they take Wollaba and move him. Regardless, I think the point of this exercise really is to show you that someone's got to move to guard. Someone's got to play offensive guard. In fact, two people got to play offensive guard come the opener against Tennessee. But I trust that this coaching staff is going to be able to figure it out. I'm just a podcast host. It's not my job to figure it out. It's their job. And then I react to it. But that's just the hypothetical offensive line for you guys. Once again, they added Naquil Betrand earlier this afternoon. If he is a starting tackle, him and Willaba are probably the left tackle and the right tackle. If you add on McVay or Perry, then someone's moving to guard because you can't have three tackles. So that's just where the offensive line sits right now. And like I have said throughout this entire podcast, I really just don't think they're done adding in the portal at the offensive line spot. I just don't see it. 4 of their 5 starters from last year are gone. So you kind of have to add. As far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, there was a lot of news that happened. A lot that happened today. We got the commitment I talked about, but also someone from Syracuse entered the transfer portal. Another cornerback, Jaden Bellamy. Kind of surprised by it, honestly. He was penciled in after, especially Marcellus Barnes entered the portal. Bellamy was the cornerback 1. But he entered the portal, and that's a tough loss for the Orange. And cornerback is definitely now a super, super big need. Super duper big need. There's no Clarence Lewis. He's out of eligibility. Barnes and Bellamy are in the portal. So your top 3 corners from last season, all gone. That's what we're talking about tomorrow. If I have time, I will do 2 podcasts similar to what I did today, where I'll do a mini podcast reacting to Jaden Bellamy entering the portal, and then a full podcast about the overall cornerback room and how Syracuse should move going forward. But that's if I have time. At minimum, there will be a full podcast tomorrow talking about the cornerbacks for Syracuse football. So that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenta Gibbs, they keep it real and they bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.